It's my pleasure to introduce Bernd, Senior Associate Dean in the School of Engineering, in charge of online learning and professional development, and my boss. So the expectation is that you'll be asking really good questions. And with that, I want to turn over to Bernd.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm Bernd Girod. I'm happy to chair this panel, Innovations in Higher Education. Now, in the last 2.5 years, there have been few topics in higher education that have received more public attention than online learning and massive open online courses. Our own president, John Hennessy, coined the term the coming tsunami of educational technology, and you all heard him speak about this yesterday in his keynote speech. The New York Times declared 2012 the year of the MOOC. Time magazine put out a title that said, "College is dead, long live college." And the president of a large private nonprofit university in the Northeast, which I'm not going to name, not to be outdone, exclaimed, "We are witnessing the end of higher education as we know it." So why all hyperbole? Online learning, as of course all of us know here, is not new. Even though if you are not very familiar with this area and you open the paper in the last years, you could get the impression that online learning has just been invented. But it's in fact been around for over 2 decades and quite successfully. Even before MOOCs, nearly 3 million students were enrolled in fully online programs in the United States. That's 14% of total students. 75% of these in degree programs. At Stanford, we've offered master's degrees online in engineering since 1969. And initially delivered over closed-circuit television, recorded in classrooms like this one, and for over 15 years now over the internet. And of course, we are not unique in that. There are many other institutions, and many of you here are doing similar things. At Stanford, over 7% of our master's degrees in engineering are earned by graduate students at a distance. So what happened? Well, MOOCs began in 2011, and that's a story that has been retold now many times. 3 Stanford computer science faculty offered courses to the world free of charge. And to everybody's surprise, 350,000 online learners signed up for these courses, and tens of thousands completed these courses. And since then, MOOCs, of course, have been embraced by hundreds of universities and millions of students around the world. Now, it's, of course, technology that made that possible. Video streaming, webcams, screen capture, social media, all ubiquitous, all inexpensive today. But this is really not about technology. It's about new economic models that might disrupt higher education broadly and continuing engineering education specifically. And for those who are a little closer to the action, it's also very much about the promise of technology improving pedagogy and learning outcomes. So to explore these topics, we've invited a group of distinguished panelists, which I will introduce in a moment. I will speak with our panel for probably about half an hour, and then open it up for discussion with the audience. And we're going to have microphones floating around here for this. But you also have an opportunity to already post your questions using the mobile app before that, and I encourage you to do this. So as in the past, Robert Karayama is going to read through your questions, and I told him before he's going to be our fifth Beatle. So we have the Fab Four here, and we've got basically him as a conduit for your questions. And if he sees that your question actually fits well with what we're talking about, he's going to signal me and inject your question here as we go on. But again, you can also later on pick up the microphone then and discuss directly. So that's what that we have ahead of us. So let me introduce our panelists. Maggie Johnson is the Director of Education and University Relations for Google. She manages all technical training for Google engineers and staff, and manages Google strategic initiatives in online teaching and learning, university relations, and K-12 outreach. And the last, I know, is very dear to your heart. And Maggie previously was a director of undergraduate studies in the Department of Computer Science at Stanford University. And I have in my latest version of my slides, I actually picked out a quote from everybody. They're not on here, but I'm just going to read it to you as a way of introducing each of our panelists. So here's Maggie's quote, and these are from interviews or panel discussions or maybe writings of our panelists in the past. So Maggie's quote: "Google's culture is academic at its core. Our founders were PhD students when they created our initial search engine. That spirit of curiosity and exploration is what drives our researchers and engineers." John Mitchell, my colleague, is Vice Provost for Online Learning at Stanford University. He's the Mary and Gordon Cray Family Professor of Computer Science and by courtesy of Electrical Engineering and of Education. And his research focus has been for many years and still is, if he finds the time, computer security. And John's quote: "MOOC have gotten everyone thinking, but they are just the tip of the iceberg. Technology provides new tools that have the potential to greatly enhance teaching and learning." Our third panelist I want to introduce is Ed Jaselskis. Ed is the Jimmy D. Clark Distinguished Professor in the Department of Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering at North Carolina State University. Ed has served as Program Director for the National Science Foundation in the area of Information Technology and Infrastructure Systems. He's a member of the National Academy of Construction and a thought leader on the use of online technologies for construction engineering education. So here is Ed's quote: "The beauty of using web conferencing platform is that everyone with a computer and internet connection can join the online class session. In addition to live video from the job site, you can display drawing and run computer applications like schedules or project management software to present to the live virtual classroom." And last but not least, we have John Katzman. John is founder and CEO of Noodle. And maybe we can hear a little bit later on in the discussion what Noodle does and its goals are. He's also the founder of 2U, which is working with universities like USC or Georgetown or UNC Chapel Hill or Washington University to create high-quality online degree programs. He's also founder and former CEO of the Princeton Review, and the director of a number of nonprofits, including the National Association for Independent Schools and the Woodrow Wilson Foundation and the National Alliance of Public Charter Schools. And John's quote, I like this a lot, or I found it, I think, in an interview that you gave maybe a year or two ago. "There are an awful lot of crappy startups in the education space right now, and people building features and thinking they're companies. The real opportunities, I think, are larger than that." All right. I think there's one more slide, which I think the staff made up for me. So I'm Senior Associate Dean for Online Learning and Professional Development in the School of Engineering. So you already know this from Paul. I'm also a professor of electrical engineering. And my research interests are in image, video, and networked multimedia systems and have been for a long time. So let's actually get started with a panel, and I guess I'm supposed to move to the red chair for this. The first question that I would like to ask you, in fact, I'd like to ask all of you, is really a compound question with two parts. What is the one educational innovation that has had the highest impact during your career? And how has the excitement around MOOCs and online learning since 2011 affected what you are doing? Maggie, do you want to get started?
I can do that. Well, I would say at Google, for me, it's been especially satisfying to be involved in applying our core products and services, whether it's YouTube or Search or Hangouts in an educational context. Like, these systems have really great potential. I mean, they've had a huge impact already. And I think the potential is really to provide high quality educational content for anyone on the planet as we solve the access problems over time. So I think that's, for me, the most satisfying thing that I've been able to do since at Google.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and for me, as a professor who's been teaching online courses for probably 10 plus years or so, the technology or innovation that really helped me a lot bring more, I guess, real world experience to the classroom is wireless technology. I'm in the construction area, so in the past I used to bring large classes to construction sites, and it's kind of unwieldy and it's not very safe to do that. So with the wireless capability, we can essentially beam construction sites to the classroom with live audiences, and also to our distance education crew as well. So that's the main innovation for me.
Either John.
Going this way, so I'll go. So I've been teaching online, I think, since I came here in 1988, and previously some sort of distance classes. There were distance classes here that I took in the mid-'70s, where we had a unidirectional kind of video broadcast, and then some kind of muffled sound that would come in by a bidirectional audio. So you could almost hear people elsewhere, but it really didn't work very well. For me, the most disruptive event in 2011 was the development of MOOCs, but it was disruptive for me personally in a different way than for others. In, I think, 2008, a student came up to me after class and said, could we have a discussion on the group on the web so we could talk to each other outside of class? And I said, oh, we already have one. It's on the news group. And the student gave me this completely blank stare. So I couldn't understand how a computer science student would not be familiar with NNTP and threaded news readers, which you all are familiar with, right? Turns out they went out and nobody was using them. And I thought, well, we ought to upgrade our use of technology in teaching to match what people are using in other kinds of activities. So I started a project to develop a web platform. I teamed up with Bernd, who had a great project on video and efficient transmission of video to allow students to zoom in on various things or automatically follow a speaker. Daphne Kohler and Andrew Ng in my department were interested, so they joined our group. Roy P. from the School of Education. We were having a great collaboration. Everything was moving along smoothly until the summer of 2011, when two of those people went off and started a company. So that really threw a wrench into the works, and I wasn't fast enough at starting a company, so I got stuck with this job. But I'm having a great time.
I think the biggest innovation, probably prompted by the net more than anything, is the explosion of marketplaces in education. If you look, 30, 40 years ago, you went to the school down the street, you went to the college for the most part, with the exception of a couple great colleges and universities down the road. And you've now got real choices. And for instance, at 2U, we created very large, high-quality online graduate programs, the MBA from UNC Chapel Hill. So you've got 2 great universities in the Bay Area, but all of a sudden you've got a third who has dozens of students here as well, and moving towards hundreds if you add the Masters in Teaching from USC. And as the erosion of geographic protections starts disappearing, I think that's starting to have some real impact on the economics of higher ed. At the same time, that's being mirrored across the board. If you look at K-12, there are virtual schools, charter schools, independents and parochials, and the system of district schools is starting to break down. If you look at just-in-time learning, especially in engineering, some online, some face-to-face, that is an attack, obviously, on engineering schools, on traditional engineering graduate programs. And so what Noodle is actually an effort to create TripAdvisor for education. So you're looking for a preschool or a college or a video on the quadratic function or a lacrosse coach, and we want to help you find it. But I think it's part, hopefully we're part of a larger ecosystem that I think is a story in progress.
So one of the people who was involved with the original set of 3 MOOCs that I mentioned earlier was a very distinguished scientist from Google, Peter Norvig. He co-taught with Sebastian Thrun that very first artificial intelligence course, which made the front page of the New York Times, and that really then triggered the whole hype that we've been seeing. And Andy, if he's here in the room, Andy, you still remember actually dealing with this and making sure that we're doing the right thing when this basically came bottom up. But Peter came probably about a year or 2 later here and gave a colloquium talk, and he was not that upbeat. And in fact, the phrase that I remember was, well, you should be careful. Education is the Afghanistan of technology. That was basically what he said. Education is the Afghanistan of technology. So what I want to ask you, and particularly maybe the two Johns, but also the others. MOOCs, are they here to stay, or is that really just a flash in the pan?
Well, I don't want to come into the house of MOOCs and do some trash talking, but the fact is MOOCs are incredibly fun and great. But there's no business model. There's no sustainable point to them, in a sense. And you look at the large organizations trying to navigate, and they're gravitating towards one model, and there's a second model that probably you'll see win. What they'd like to be, in a sense, at first, was a replacement for colleges, and that's not going to happen. And then, for a number of reasons, and then they said, well, what will be is a curriculum of asynchronous materials, and what we'll get is professors at other universities to adopt our curriculum and our lectures and become TAs for us. So every other school will simply be us, but then taught by their junior faculty, and that's not going to happen either. What I think will happen is as the MOOCs start deconstructing the materials down from a full course into modules. And as the textbook companies start taking their textbooks and bringing them into rich media and similarly trying to make them adaptive and collaborative and modular, you'll see Coursera and the other MOOCs compete dead on with Pearson and the other textbook companies as the creators of pieces that professors can then curate into really compelling courses that are tied to their mission, their interests, and their kids' interests. And
so
I think that's going to be exciting.
Of a disruption of the textbook market, if we look at it.
I think MOOCs will utterly destroy the textbook market.
Okay. Then of actually higher education as a whole.
Which is doing very well before they came along.
Well, it's an accelerant.
So John, do you want to add to this? Trash talk in the House of MOOCs. I mean, you have to some rebuttal maybe.
I mean, I guess my opinion is that MOOCs are something like that. Let's just say free or low cost, broadly distributed public information, learning information, is an important part of the way I see us proceeding in the university. But to put it in perspective, I think our main goal and the thing that this technological kick has started is a much broader interest in teaching and learning innovation. So that's really where I think we ought to focus as educators. The technology is something that helps people rethink what they're doing. If you're going to change medium, you might also start thinking about how you teach and understand how to do that better. So I think that that's our main focus. There are two other things that I think are important, and a simple sort of slogan is do good and do well. So I think we have a lot of expertise on this college campus, and many of you have great faculty at your campuses. If we can make some of that information and expertise more broadly accessible to others, that's great. That comes along with our natural interests as faculty to help everyone see the world as we do and to provide opportunities. So I think that will continue, but it's I'd like to see that as an outgrowth of our teaching and learning innovation. As we produce things in digital form, we can make some of them freely or available at low cost or close to our marginal production costs. At the same time that we try to do good, we ought to do well for our institutions. And for that, I don't think free public to everyone is going to be the most effective educational experience. And it's also not the most sustainable financial model. So I think we will use similar technology to reach more broadly in various ways. And we will all stay tuned during the next 5 or 10 years to see how that develops.
So here to stay, yes, but maybe not the end of college as we know it.
A component, but not the full story.
And it's evolving too. I mean, if you look at UDacity's model now, they're much more about employability skills and modularizing it down to things that are going to help people get jobs, on-the-job training within companies. It's a very niche thing they're trying to do, but it's another angle. So.
Are they reacting correctly to what the market is actually looking for?
I think there is definitely a gap between what students learn in an academic environment and what's required in industry. So I think that there probably is a space there they could operate in.
So whenever there's big change, one of our colleagues from Harvard is going to enter this stage, Clayton Christensen. And in fact, I think he's already now published 2 books related to disruption in higher education. So he distinguishes disruptive innovations and what he calls sustaining innovations. So disruptive innovations are those that define define new markets and new value networks, and sustaining innovations are just those who basically add to the current system and business models that we have. So just briefly, what are we finding ourselves in right now? Disruptive innovation, sustaining, or maybe no innovation is all just business as usual. But Maggie, what do you think? It's
around MOOCs?
Yeah, well,
Specifically,
higher education and technology broadly.
Oh, it's hard to say. I think we're in an evolving, sort of process.
So it's more sustaining.
I think it's sustaining now
Yeah.
as people try and find a business model and try and find a way to make it work at scale.
Ed, would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I mean, from a professor standpoint,
Yeah.
Somebody who's been teaching for 25 or so years, and using kind of the older model of teaching, even though I've been involved with distance ed courses for several years, I haven't really jumped in with both feet, but I'm starting to see that maybe I need to, and maybe other professors need to do the same thing, because I don't think this is a flash. I think that, whatever it's going to be called in the future, it's here to stay. And so the way that professors have been teaching traditionally, I think is going to have to change in the future. Now, what that's going to look like, I'm not sure exactly, but I think we need to keep our eyes open with these technology changes, and we need to go with the technology change. If we don't, I'm not sure what's going to happen to those professors in the future.
I think what we've seen so far has really been supportive of existing higher education institutions. The MOOCs that are delivered on the main platforms are all associated with faculty at existing, recognized, conventional institutions of higher education. They bring more attention to us. They recognize the current kind of course structure. It hasn't been highly disruptive of the structure of higher education. I think the place we will see a few more bumps will come when we have changes in accredited degree programs. And that, because there's a lot of inertia in the process of being accredited and the issuing of credentials and degrees, that will come a little more slowly than the flash that we've seen so far. But I think when that starts to happen, then we're in for a little bit more of a bumpy ride.
That question depends on who you're talking about. If you're Stanford, this is a sustaining evolution. If you're a regional, especially private college, this is potentially highly disruptive, right? So national competitors who are on the virtual side of a cost curve, right? Anything online or using technology, high upfront cost, low marginal cost. The people who scale really have an advantage. And so the people at the wrong end of that, I think, are going to be in real trouble. And if you're a textbook company, I think it's also pretty disruptive.
If you think particularly on continuing engineering education, I mean, is that going to be disruptive there?
I think it's going to be disruptive. In some ways, good. I think this opens up global markets that are really, really exciting. And the U.S., it's our education, as you guys know, it's our 5th largest service export. For any number of reasons, I think there's tremendous potential for U.S. schools to reach students all over the place. At the same time, it really is interesting to see what sorts of things that the dev boot camps of the world will pull off and the just-in-time learning. And again, I think some continuing ed programs will jump all over that, the ones that don't really have a problem.
So here's a question. You guys were talking about how credentialing might be an issue. Faculty will have to adjust. How will universities and academic institutions have to adjust economically to MOOCs and online learning? Is that a different business model?
John?
I'm not sure what you mean by it. There are a couple ways to take the question. So you could think, how would we respond to lower priced education that in some way is understood to be comparable to ours? So of course that will never happen because we're Stanford. Otherwise, we will either have to lower our price, seems unlikely, or increase our quality. And so I think that that's actually a good way to think about commoditized education, is that for those of us who are in institutions where we want to interact with students, we ought to think about new teaching and learning models that will be distinctive here and different from what will be delivered at a large scale, and focus on how to do best for our students and also how to make the academic community that we have as lively and productive and energetic as possible.
Ed, do you want to?
Don't really have anything to add.
I mean, I would just add that if you think about the fact that a lot of what Daphne and Andrew started was blended, flipping the classroom, so that you have students, sort of absorbing the lecture content via video, and then they go into a classroom and work with the professor. It's really flipping that experience. And it also allows for efficiency in just delivering the content, so that if you think about really leveraging that, then there's another sort of dimension to the residential experience that could be implemented. There could be projects, there could be additional things you could fit into those 4 years if you really make efficient some of these new learning models. And that could make, you know, a place like Stanford or MIT, these top tier schools have additional value that others can't have or you know, don't have.
But I would suggest that most institutions are interested in distinguishing themselves. So it isn't just top tier institutions that can look for teaching and learning models and program changes that would distinguish themselves. I think that's a good way for everyone to think about the future. What do you have to offer and how do you make that most attractive to students?
I want to stay a little bit with what you just introduced, Maggie, namely, you know, innovative pedagogy in the classroom that technology might enable. So what are, you know, maybe Ed, you've been very interested in that. I know from your experiments and your writings. You know, what are some of the innovative approaches that you've experimented with to bring maybe some more of the real world into your classroom?
Yeah, so as I was saying in the introduction, I've been experimenting with, you know, bringing kind of the real world into the classroom, and in my case, it's basically construction. And, you know, 10 years ago or so, before, you know, the MiFis and things like that, we had to actually set up our own antenna on a construction site. I believe we put it on a tower crane, so we essentially created a Wi-Fi bubble, you know, on the job site, and within that Wi-Fi bubble, we could walk around with our portable camera and computer and basically, you know, stream back to, at that time I was with Iowa State University, so we were streaming back to students there, and they were able to ask questions to the person on the job site. And the benefit was they didn't have to travel 250 miles like we did to get to that job site to see what was going on. The technology has been evolving in this area. Then the MiFi came out. We didn't have to set up all this, you know, infrastructure on the construction site just to do what we wanted to do. And so then the MiFi came out, and that worked, you know, okay sometimes, not okay other times, because it all depends on how many users are on that cell tower at the time. But anyway, then we moved to, you know, a streaming type device that bonds multiple air cards together, and I know a lot of TV companies are using this kind of bonded technology to drive around in vehicles and whatnot. And
so how important was it for you to actually do this live? I mean, that's what you did, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you could also just send a video team and then
we could
shoot
have,
some video
yeah.
and then tell the students to watch it.
Yeah, and the students, we did surveys after, you know, after some of these tours to see what kind of response they had. And I think that the key thing is the students really liked the fact that it was interactive, that they could ask questions to the person on the construction site and get immediate feedback, as opposed to just watching a video, which, you know, is kind of stale. So they really, they like that. We're going to kind of push that in the K through 12 level. I was all set to actually broadcast a tour from Ellis Island to my daughter's 7th grade class in North Carolina, and had a park ranger all set up to do the tour. And then Hurricane Sandy came around and just kind of knocked that whole area out. So we weren't able to do that, but we could have. Wherever we've got good cell service, we can do live broadcasts essentially anywhere and beam it back to a classroom. So that's some of the innovative things. And the students really like the interactive nature of these tours. And I think industry actually likes it too. Instead of sending somebody from corporate headquarters to a construction site, we can just beam the construction site to the person at their, you know, headquarters, and they can save the trip, save money, and there is interest on the industrial side with this idea as well.
You know, John, you mentioned earlier, you know, how you had taught online for a long time, and you know, in the old days at Stanford, people could talk back right from a distance, and we lost that when we moved to internet delivery. Was that in your mind something important that was helpful for the students, or just a curiosity that you had this booming phone voice coming from nowhere and then asking a question?
I think what I remember from the 8 years that I taught with that here is mostly a source of classroom humor. Occasionally there were questions that you could decipher that actually were different from the questions being asked in the class. And on a good day, someone from a company would beam in some of their experience in their company, but it was not technically, highly effective, and so it was. There were some issues about quality that also got in the way. To be honest about it, but I think the social aspect of education at scale is very important. And some of the directions that seem really exciting to me are things like the NovoEd platform, which focuses on group projects and peer evaluation that really take advantage of the network nature of the community there.
Two things that strike me from the world, actually, of other content, movies and video games and so forth, that sort of inform my opinion of this. All the tools to make movies and all the tools to make video games have gotten more powerful and less expensive every year, pretty much from the get-go. Yet the average price of making a movie, the average cost of making a video game, has gone up steadily. It's $100 million to make a full movie now. I think you're going to see that here, that as the tools get better, you're still going to see a competition in terms of the content, that just a talking head video, even snippets, even modularized, is not going to get any traction. And so the content side of this will become interesting in that way. And the other thing is, in every industry, the fight between the content providers and the pipes, right? So the cable companies fighting with the networks all the time, and all of a sudden you can't watch CBS for a week. I think you're going to see that here too. What's the value of that content versus the value of the university, the accreditation, the professors, what's going on in the class, the selection process? And those are all kind of TBDs that we're paying attention to.
But that sounds like online education might actually be not as cheap as people present it to be right now.
If a module, you got to look at it this way. If at 2U, we said we can spend $100,000 up front and $50,000 a year thereafter building the asynchronous material for a course. Because if 1,000 students a year take that course, it's de minimis. It's cheaper than a textbook, right? If in the modular world, that course might be not taken by 1,000 people, but that module might be taken by 100,000 people. So you can spend an awful lot against the creation of the perfect kind of way of manipulating atoms modeled in a particle accelerator, and still be fine. And meanwhile, you've got a bunch of nonprofit and foundations also paying for some of that content. And so you could imagine tremendous amounts of money going to good content creation, and still the price of asynchronous content per course per student being under $25.
Can I ask you a question about Noodle? So you referred to some kind of contention between the platform organizations, really, and universities as the content developers.
So the content organizations and the universities.
Content organizations being?
Well, the people creating the asynchronous content, which might be the same, just different professors at the same university. Okay. And the universities actually curating content into the asynchronous materials for a course, I think might have some tension.
Yeah. Okay. There's another tension that I think we see, which is between universities and the MOOC delivery platforms. And one of the issues there has to do with whether this will become like an iTunes, Amazon, a small number of portals or aggregators dominating that market. And it's not clear to me that this is really a technology-driven or technology-limited process. It's relatively easy to replicate the current platforms with low technology. So it's not clear that the platform organizations have a technological advantage at present, but they might have a market advantage. On the other hand, if there was good web search, a good Yelp for education, then that would be a countervailing force that would give universities greater exposure and greater visibility to potential learners.
That is certainly my bet.
Okay.
I think in that three-handed game, the technology platform providers have the weakest hand by a long shot.
Good. Not to express my bias or anything. I'll go with that.
You know, I wanted to steer the discussion back a little bit to the social aspects of learning that we touched upon a little bit earlier when we talked about classroom learning, and but we didn't really explore this topic yet for online learning. You know, online learning can be quite lonely if somebody just sits at their computer and is not part of a group. But we know that learning is really a social process, not just a cognitive process. It's also a social process. So what are the technological advances that you see that could really transform this challenge to online learning? Are things that we see springing up with web forums, et cetera, are these just a first step? Is that already the answer? What should we be looking for there? Ed,
I'll just start what I try to do when I teach a course with the live students in the class, and then also the distance ed students, up to a couple years ago or so, I basically treated the distance ed students as if they were right in the same class. I did not, and they were taking it, basically they were watching the lectures later that week, but they were part of my class. And so I communicated with them via email, talked to many of them on the phone. When we created teams, project teams, they were basically integrated with people in the classroom as if they were, with us in the class, even though, one I think was in South Korea. But I still treated him just like that he was in the class. And then, these web-based forum type software came out. So Piazza was the software that we used at NC State, and that worked out really well. I taught a global construction practices class live with universities in China and India and Canada, basically, and that kind of discussion forum helped bring the whole class. Now, it wasn't just some distance ed students and my students, it was students in India at IIT Madras, it was students in China, and it helped bring all the students together again to give the same feel, like we're all part of the same class. We also had distance ed students too. Okay, so I kind of tried stitching everybody together. That's how technology helped me.
Is there a tension between having more and more sophisticated online learning productions? I mean, the best ones are adaptive, right? They adapt to the individual learner and her style and her background, and this seems to be maybe in conflict with the social aspects of learning. It's of course we already encountered that in the classroom, presumably, but maybe even more so online.
I think that's really insightful, and we think about that a lot in all, that the more it's a competency-based program or an adaptive program, you have a class of one, right? And so what are you doing with everybody else in the class if they're off doing different things? And the answer, in a sense, is that that courses are organized in cohorts that are moving at more or less the same pace, that this week, that material, you're going at your own pace, the asynchronous material, but then circling back in the class discussions, whether they're online or face-to-face, or where we can talk about it and share. And I think you have to have both.
I agree.
I think this is a good time maybe to open it up to the audience if there are questions and comments to what we've been talking about. Just identify yourself by name, and then say what you would like to contribute. If there's nobody right now, we're just going to go on because do we have somebody?
Question
okay.
there.
Yeah. So whoever has the microphone, welcome to speak.
Good afternoon, Mervyn Jones, Imperial College, London. You see, I have an odd grey hair on my head, and I remember very clearly in the 1960s when the Open University was founded in the UK, people were saying, this is the death of the university. In fact, the Open University expanded the role of the existing universities. There was collaboration between the two. Professors were helping the OU students, and it opened up higher education yet further. My question to you is, can you see it in this sort of way?
Anybody?
Sure, that this is a completely great idea. If we could, if faculty here could reach more students elsewhere directly or indirectly through various kinds of arrangements, I think that would be a great outcome.
But it's not in competition with Stanford, with NC State or whatever. It's adding to the totality of education.
Yeah, I mean, the number of people we can accommodate on campus is very limited, but if we can have broader reach in various ways, either directly through our programs or collaboratively, I think those are all promising directions.
The Open University is brilliant, and I think it's a more sustainable model. It's proven to be a more sustainable model than simply asynchronous content put out there. Western Governors is probably the closest thing we have to it here, I would think.
Capella, maybe.
Perhaps.
Great. So I have a question. So something that John Katzman said. Why do platform providers have the weakest hand in a three-handed game?
Reminds me of playing Pinochle. You can.
Well,
Actually, I can answer, being Google. We actually got involved in the MOOC space about 2 years ago, and we were able to, given that we had App Engine and YouTube and Hangouts and had all of the core technologies that we needed in order to build a platform, we were able to kind of wire it all up together in 6 weeks. So, I mean, it's not that hard to create these platforms. There's no rocket science there. So I would just say that it is not really high-end technology or anything in there that really makes it challenging to put one of these together.
or protectable.
It's just not, yeah. I mean, and we open sourced it, so anybody can now take what we did and use it. So.
And yet, isn't there a lock-up effect, a lock-in effect, if you control the platform? Even though if it's easier to build, doesn't really matter as long as a lot of people use it, and then there are very high costs of switching to a different platform.
I'm assuming that the content providers, whether they're faculties or textbook companies or anybody else, Creative Commons, Gates, would have very, very little interest in their content being available only on one platform. I don't see why that would be to their advantage. And again, they're one of the hands in the game that has a pretty strong hand.
I think, John, that probably resonates with your strategy, right?
Yeah, so what we're doing here is really following faculty interest and developing online material for currently any of 3 platforms. That seems like the simplest way to make sure that we track developments in the platform, that we follow any good ideas that come from the platform organizations, and also really are able to set our own course rather than being unduly influenced by some educational or learning model views of one particular small group of 25-year-olds.
Yeah, I'll put a number on it. I can't imagine that the learning stack, the content management system, learning management system, assessment, adaptive engine, that whole stack, counseling engine to help with retention, will fall much below $25 or $50 per student per year, nor end up anywhere close to $100. So in the course of what is being spent on a student in a year at a university, it's just not a big deal.
Yeah.
As more and more institutions go online, does this create advantage for first-tier institutions to kind of monopolize just based on brand, or does it even the playing field?
Monopolize what? So far, we have many universities participating in the MOOC movement, attempting or planning to produce, say, 10 MOOCs a year. And there is no real You could have a kind of a competition, a number of learners, but it's not clear that that's really where the competition lies. So I think it's nice to see a variety of institutions participating. There isn't really a well-defined market or business model in which you could see us losing by having more people access more learning opportunities. So I think it's just great to see more universities participate. It generates interest in education and generates innovation in teaching so far.
If you see the costs start going up of creating really high quality content, you'll have a kind of 80-20 thing. You'll see a consolidation of the main providers who are spending the money and building stuff, and then a very long tail of other stuff.
I want to maybe spend a few minutes steering the discussion towards the questions around credentialing, and certainly technology can have an impact there, and possibly even provide much more fine-grained credentials than we typically had. Udacity certainly has experimented with that. Just giving really out a sheet of very specific skills that somebody might have acquired through an online course, because this is now something you can really track even on a sub-course basis. I wanted to ask you, Maggie, whether this is something that, for instance, Google would like to see in people that you would interview and hire.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, if someone provides a certificate that they've gone through this, set of courses and have a set of skills.
How specific would you actually, if it's possible by the technology that we use for these courses, how specific would you really like to see the
I think
the transcript of the future to be?
Transcripts of the future. Okay. I think for Google it would be challenging because we hire generalists.
Uh-huh.
We hire computer scientists and software engineers that can shift quickly, mm-hmm. can learn new things very quickly, and that actually requires, I think, a computer science degree. It uh-huh. requires a lot of the theoretical uh-huh. underpinnings that you get in a computer science program. So currently, I would say that we are not really set up uh-huh. as an organization to uh-huh. be able to hire people with a very, very small kind of uh-huh. Targeted set of skills. I don't think we could fit them into our organization as it uh-huh. exists.
Uh-huh.
Do you think you could make an entertaining MOOC out of your interview questions?
Yes, we could do that. We could do that. Or how people answer them, that would be even better.
Just one thing I think you'll start seeing, rather than talk about an AA and a BA and an MS, I think you're going to see a move towards percent complete and almost a gamification. It's less about the specific skill you have being important, especially to tech companies, because the world changes quickly. But I think especially at the low end of the market, the notion of trying to encourage kids to play all the way through. You're at 37% complete every course you take, you're now at 42, you're now at 57. That when you start thinking that way, some of the dynamics of gaming mm-hmm. start taking effect, and there are people kind of playing with that notion. Mm-hmm. So the micro.
So it's really more for the learner.
Yep.
Herself, right? Then. Mm-hmm.
But another mm-hmm. angle of this, you can see in the open source software projects that many people participate and try to build up a portfolio, really, of accomplishments on one or more mm-hmm. platforms. And that's another form of credential that I think has some merit and some weight. So you can imagine that if there were online repositories of projects created by learners on a range of different learning experiences, that could constitute a portfolio of some value to employers and to the learners themselves.
So is there? Do you think there is some room there for competency-based degree programs ultimately? I mean, there are some institutions that have been experimenting with that, and certainly the technology now makes this more possible. Yeah, right now, I guess it's just seat hours, right?
But I think that's an interesting direction for continuing professional education in particular, because many working professionals acquire experience and skills through their work that then would make it unnecessary for them to study certain things after that. But if that was recognized in a program, it would also help steer them towards the things that would be most valuable in their career advancement.
Yeah, we have a question from the audience or comment.
Hi, Anthony from CPD Live. I'm not from a startup of 25-year-olds, as you can probably tell. I'm from a startup of 49-year-olds.
Good luck.
Just a comment on the technology and the discussion we've been having here for the last 5-10 minutes or so. And can I suggest that the technology, and we've built a MOOC platform, it took us a bit longer than 6 weeks, but we're not Google, but the technology I'd suggest is probably 10% of the actual outcome in terms of what the overall bundle is about. Where I think we need to really develop is in the learning design that goes into that environment and start thinking about learning design differently, thinking about the way that we support the experts in that environment differently, think about the way we support the students going through that environment, the way we facilitate, the way we engage, the way we create community in that environment. That's where the real key is, I think, in terms of the future of this. And that's what's going to create the outcomes. The technology's 10%. So as a comment, but I'd be interested in your thoughts in terms of that.
Firstly, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I think from the discussion we had so far, you might have the impression that it's straightforward and simple to produce good online learning activities, which is certainly not at all the case. Some of the technology is relatively straightforward web kind of technology, but a sophisticated learning environment that tracks learner behavior, that's responsive, that leverages learning science in a good, effective way is a highly complex activity, and there's great room for improvement. And there has been excellent work by a number of people in academia and elsewhere on that issue.
There are two ways I look at your question, though. One is that the technology could get better, will get better, but you've got kind of an arms race, and it doesn't mean that the price of that technology will dramatically rise overall. The second, though, is the importance of instructional designers. Like, you're a chemical engineering professor, you have no interest in becoming an expert in online learning pedagogy, much less spending the time to construct all the animations or simulations or whatever. So when I think of modules as becoming pretty expensive, it's because the people working with those professors who are doing real work and crafting those tools and crafting that content need to get paid.
So I think, yeah.
I'm Gail Spock, thank you, from New Jersey Institute of Technology, and I have a question that I don't think has come up yet. 4 of you, including our excellent moderator, are STEM people. Engineering, computer science, Mr. Katzman is probably not a STEM person or has a company that is not devoted to STEM education. So I'm wondering what role you see for MOOCs by academic discipline. Mm-hmm. Is there a difference? So that it's how your remarks, are they STEM related because of your knowledge, your experience, your interest in quality of an experience, but in a particular discipline, or not? So it's a more broad question of MOOCs by academic discipline.
I was a computer science major back in the day.
Well, but now you're somewhere else.
But I'm somewhere else.
You have a company.
The biggest difference is the idea of micro-credentials, I think, has almost no magic outside of engineering. So that's one difference. Overall, though, the notion of continuing education of one sort or another, I think will be pretty much the same. The question of what do I need to know and what do I want to know with a range of delivery systems, all in a part-time, just-in-time kind of modality.
John Mitchell, you have a broad perspective because you don't just serve the engineering school. Stanford is a liberal arts university, and engineering is only a small part of it.
So initially, the MOOC activity on campus here started in the School of Engineering and primarily in the computer science and related departments. So initially, the humanists particularly were kind of taken aback and also upset that they were not getting the same kind of opportunities or seeing the same opportunities. And so we've worked hard to try to think about that and approach different groups in different parts of campus to see what we could do that would be effective for them. I think another perspective is that the applicability of the technology is more dependent on the teaching model or what you ask learners to do than the actual subject. So if you'd like to give a lecture for an hour and not answer any questions, we could do that for any subject, but the different kinds of interaction we can support automatically may vary by subject. We did have recently an afternoon program in the English department featuring projects that we'd supported on campus in the humanities. And it was surprising to see what these 5 teams had to demo on large screens. And it turns out actually, I mean, much to the surprise of those of us who are engineers, the humanists are actually kind of creative. And they were able to think, of ways to use technology in engaging people in their subjects. And some of them are really, really attractive and also provide access to things that are scarce, such as medieval manuscripts. There are not that many medievalists in the world, and they're all internet connected and can share now digital representations of scarce resources across the net.
You know what market, just as a business guy, the market that is dwarfing engineering as an ongoing learning thing is increasingly English language instruction using a lot of these technologies.
So just to add one thing, I'm actually a musician, so I'm not a computer scientist. And one of the other things that at Google, we have a university relations team, and we spend a lot of time building research collaborations with faculty all around the world. And we have quite a focus right now on online learning at scale and education innovation. And we've got at least 5 grants with humanists. We've got one with a music professor teaching composition via online learning at scale, with an art professor. So we're really trying to figure out what are the special needs in that space and what kinds of technical kind of innovation can we do to support that kind of teaching and learning.
So I'm going to get in trouble if I don't wrap up here because Paul wants to have things operate like a Swiss train schedule. I think those words. But just permit me to ask one closing questions and hopefully short answers from everybody, even though the question is hard. So I would like each of you to imagine, and you can join in the audience as well. Think about the question and maybe. And formulate your answer and then compare it with what you hear from our panelists. Imagine it's 2024 and the IACEE World Congress meets again at Stanford, and maybe in the same room even. And what is the most important topic that we will be talking about then in 10 years? What's the buzz going to be at the World Congress with this group? Maggie, what would you think?
Sure, start with me. Engineering education in 2024. Mm-hmm. So I would say, if I think about computer science education, well, the infrastructure, the design and the maintenance of the infrastructure would be done. Computer science education would not be about infrastructure. It would be about probably, building beautiful, interactive interfaces, facilitating app development for everyone. So you're like a teacher and you need to build an app. So you go into this beautiful interface, you enter a couple pieces of data, and this AI-driven system just builds your app for you. So I think that's the kind of thing. It's much more about making that available for everyone and providing whatever's needed from an AI perspective to make that really seamless.
I guess from a professor's standpoint, for me, when I teach a lecture, after not maybe having taught the course for a year. I have to kind of load my shotgun, so to speak, and it takes time to do that. So I look at, the concept of, MOOCs and using pre-recorded type material out there. And so I think, in another decade or so, I can see the role of a professor changing. So there's going to be less, just kind of brute force, studying notes and whatnot, and leveraging technology to do more of the teaching for us, which frees up more time for professors to do other things, like research and whatnot for the universities. That's what I see.
So I'm reminded of a comment that someone made to me when I started asking representatives of different companies what they like to see from our computer science program at the time. And the most common answer I got was, the problem with our program at the time was all students took the same sequence of courses, and there was no way to really distinguish one from the other from their transcript. So I think that many of the basic technology issues we're struggling with now will be less prominent in discussion 5 or 10 years from now. But I think the potential for different students to do different projects that address different kind of problems in their degree programs and in their continuing education programs will continue to be appealing, and that's one of the directions that we will go in through the technology and teaching advancements that we'll have over that time.
If trends continue, the unit of instruction will continue to get smaller, and schools of continuing education and engineering may well be selling in the hour or day as almost more of a consulting practice than what you would think of as a university or a continuing ed program.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you as well to the audience.